Hello everyone, my name is Sebi, and what you see here is a tool I've been developing to be able to style the widgets, the basic widgets of Touch Designer. And the reason for that being that it's a bit difficult to do without a tool like this. And I would like to show you why. Basically, if you ever worked with these tools that are the basic widgets, they are really good, and you can find them in the palette. So if you pop up the palette here and you go under UI and basic widgets, you have a list of really useful widgets, like for instance a button toggle that you can just drag and drop. And they are basically out-of-the-box solutions for UI elements that are extremely useful. But one of the problems that I encountered working with them is the difficulty of styling them uniformly. And what I mean by that is that I would like sometimes to style them all together. So for instance, when you drop these elements into a container, that's exactly where I am right now, this container one, I can make them and align them as children. For instance, I would align them from top to bottom. And you can see that they actually have a layout that is by default set as a width of 450. So this container, for instance, its layout is actually 400. These are like the default values of these components. So if I would now change the width of this widget, it would become exactly to the fixed width. So something that I do all the time is just set this width of these selected widgets to fill. And what that does is basically imagine that it's a bit like the HTML div to fill the size of the parent. And that meaning that if I change the width of this container, now the widgets would follow the width of the parent. And this action that I just did, following, like, for instance, changing the background color of this widget, it's something that I do constantly every time I use them. And I found myself in always repeating the same action. So I thought that there was something wrong there. And I really wanted to create a tool where I could actually automate this process in a way that would allow me to just press a button and style all the widgets that I have in that container specifically to my style, right? So to do that, I made this tool that is called UI theme, and it's basically a widget loader, and then where you're going to be able to change all the parameters. Here in the left, you have this window called Basic Widgets, and it's basically the same as the palettes browser. It just has a different style. And the difference is that when we click on one of these, we load them in the preview. And that meaning that then we have access to this widget. To access it, we can just drag and drop the element into the right side of the tool. You will see this pop-up window saying drop the widget here. You can drop it there. And what it does is that we get access to these widgets parameters, meaning that we have the built-in parameters, which would be these ones in the top, and then the custom ones in the bottom. You will see overall that every single widget has different pages of parameters, and that will depend on what type of widget it is. So for example, if I'm going to load a slider, it will have a page that is called slider, and it's specific to this widget. The float one, for example, doesn't have that specific page. So here you see already that when I load the different widgets, it has a lot of parameters. That's basically the main issue of this problem, that we have tons and tons of parameters, and it's very difficult to take control of all of them. And the tool basically is going to work in this other tab called Parameters Preset. And here we have a list of all these collections of pages of parameters stored in this single component. And what that's going to do is that it's going to allow us to change specific parameters of the targeted widgets, but as a whole. So it will get these settings and apply to all of the widgets. So to do that, I'm going to now, for example, change the background color as I showed. So usually my process, I take the background color out, and I also set the layout fixed to fill, as I said. And then I can press this button and you see this little glitch, and it's basically setting these parameters specifically to these widgets. That basically works for all the tabs, right? So what I would like, for example, is to have the font color a bit more white. And what that will do is it will set the labels of every widget to this color. And it's a really handy tool, for example. If I would change this background color of the preview to a black, now you start to see issues again. So for example, every widget has this label parameter, and it's gonna basically have, I can show it here. So now I just selected the float 2, and I'm gonna go to the label tab and display the note. And then we can see it has like this background color again. So if I want it out, I have to do this, right? So again, if I would now apply the preview, you see that this goes back to default. And the main reason is that our preset doesn't have that setting. So what we should do is to go to parameters preset, go to the label tab, and then set the background color of the labels that we want. So in this case, I would like to not have a label color, so I would remove it. And then every single widget that has a label parameter will follow that selection. And as you can see, like, it's quite handy now to work with this, because if I want to change specific things like the float 3 here, I can, for example, this would be the numeric field. So I can change it as well. I can make this one black, and now it would follow. And another example of the inconsistency of these presets would be the string field. You can see now that if I load it, it loads a default version. If I would like to apply this parameter preset that I did, I can change the load method to preset. So if I toggle again, it will directly copy all the parameters that we have here that are set to the widget. And in this case, you see that the string field is not changing as the numeric field. And the reason for that is that they are different. And this tool helped me a lot to understand how they are built, because if you look at them individually, the string field, the parameter of the field is called field, but is different than the float that is also called field. So it is really confusing the way it's set up, but you can see here that when I hover over the display of this float 1 field display, the name of the parameter is actually numeric field display. So I can toggle it on or off. But the string field, in its field, it's actually called a string field display. So it's quite a different parameter. And that's what's all about. That the parameters preset is a library of the collection of every single parameter page that all the widgets have. So it gives us the control and overview of all of these things. So in this case, I would like my string field to maybe have a background color of a white color, and a font color, I'm going to leave it as a black type. And now I did it in the numeric field. I didn't notice, but I can do it the same in the string field. So I'm going to do the same, and the font color to black. And now I have these, right? So I can also, let's try to style the radio, why not? And one that I do usually is the off face color to make it black, and the on face, I think this I make it white. Let's see how it looks. Yeah, it's correct. And I like to have the number in black, and the font color on this side, I think this should be white, because otherwise you don't see it. So I made a mistake here. The onward should be black. And now it becomes a bit more easy to style these widgets, as you can see. And basically this is how I would create my own theme, right? So here again, I have the slider. If I don't know how the slider is changed, I can go to and drag it and play with it. And I see here that it has a parameter page called slider. And basically, if then you go to the parameters preset, you will find the same. It's a bit cluttered. It's because of the way parameters are set up in the component. You can click here at the right, have this tiny really arrow, and you can look for it. In this case, it's a slider. And now I'm in the slider page of my preset. And in this case, I would like to have the slider to be all white. Oops, I'm doing weird stuff here. I'm gonna put it all white. And the background color, I'm gonna leave it as it is. And the indicator also white. And now it will change the thing, and I can also remove the display label. And what's good about this is that this preset is going to be stored every time we save, right? So meaning that if I would now have another project, I can just have these changes and I can copy them and carry them over without having to do them every single time. That was basically what I was doing before having this tool. The good part of this is that there is a few ways to interact with this theme now. There is a way of dragging and dropping the widget out of where you need it. You can do that. I don't recommend it though, but you could do it. As you can see, it does work. It keeps the styling. Or you could target a specific container, which is the preferred way. And by that, I mean placing a container, and inside of this container, you can create your UI, which I think is most of the times the way you would work. So I'm going to place these few random widgets here. I'm going to preview them and set them as aligned to top to bottom. And I'm going to target this container to my plugin. And to do that, basically, you have to reference it in this settings tab and set the container in the target comp. And when you do that, you saw here that the target comp button, it's basically enabled. And then it's going to prompt you to, if you want to update it. And once we say yes, basically you can see here that it's sending my style to this container. And you can see that, for instance, the button state, I don't have it styled properly. And the reason for that is basically because I didn't style a button. So what I could do now is to go to my presets and go to the button tab and see that it's not styled properly. So maybe I want my off face as a white color, and now I see it is correct as my style. If it would be black and white, then I can carry these changes over to the widgets here. So the way it works, when we send the theme to a component like this one, if we take a look into the widgets that we actually changed, they have no references whatsoever. So what's actually changing are the values of these widgets. And this was quite important for me in the sense of making the tool and the theme modular. And what I mean by that is that now I could delete this component, right? And it would not affect to the result. And that was really important, because if I would now copy this UI and paste it somewhere else, let's say above the project, if it doesn't explode here. So if I would paste it here, that it basically does not give any errors or any missing references. The reason is that there's just none. And that's quite good in the sense that we can then select and choose where do we want our theme to be applied to. And that's also the reason I'm prompting UI box that if you want to do it, because it's going to change the basic values of your widgets. Lastly, there is a few more things that I would like to cover because of the complexity of doing something like this. And one would be the preset settings that we have here, this button, and these icons that you can see at the basic widgets. I'm going to start by the preset settings. The function of this, think it as like a meta preset, because when we started to make our theme, we can see that we use, for example, the color white quite often. And meaning often that maybe in the label, we have this color, and the numeric field, we also use it, right? And the issue is that when we start to have all these parameters, we end up with a similar problem that we had initially with the normal widgets, is that we have to set them all the time, right? So the solution to that is this preset settings window that you can open by clicking this button. And basically just a tiny settings page where you can create your tiny color palettes, right? So to do that, I would just copy this parameter and set the numeric field to white as a reference. And here you will see that it's referencing itself, this parameter called color1. And then I could do the same for the label. and for example, the string field color, and maybe I think we also changed the slider. Let's take a look. Yeah, I could also reference this one. And what you will see now is that if I preview this, nothing changed, but what basically doing it in this way is that now we can change these values without having to go through all of the different parameter pages that this system offers to us, because they are just too much, right? So in this case, this would be the same. I can change the button state, and the radio would have the similar result where I can set these references. And as I said before, the way it works is that there is no references to be had. So now if I would look at my container, which is this one, right? I can now send this new theme to my container, and you will see that it changes, but it does still not contain any reference to our values, which is quite good. So meaning that these references stay within your preset and don't get carried across your targeted components, which is quite useful if we want to do modular components and other things. And lastly, as I said, we have these tiny icons on the left of these loading widgets. And basically, when I did this tool, the issue that I encountered is that basically we have this parameters preset library that has a lot of parameters, right? But that doesn't mean that maybe we want to load them. So an example to that could be this int1, for example. And this is tightly related to the way that these widgets had been architectured. What I mean by that is that some widgets are related to each other. So let's take a look into the float, and let's take a look into its field. The difference between the float1 widget and the int1 widget, it's only the field type. So they share exactly the same parameters. So what I mean by that, if I now would drag the int1 and go to field, you see that the field type is set to integer, of course, because we are dragging an integer, right? So if I would set it to float, there's no difference now between float1 and integer1. And that means that if I have my parameter preset numeric field as a float, if I would preview this should stay as a float, right? But basically you see that the integers are not changing. And the reason for that is because of this data storage that they have on the right side. So if I would delete now this and load it again, you see that it does follow our preset, which is float basically. If I now would change the precision to make it a bit more clear to 1 on its float number, you will see that the integer is also changing. And that brings the issue of what parameters we want to change. And because there is so many, it's just very complex. So the solution that I found to that is to add this tiny window here. And basically what it's going to allow me to do is to set specific parameters to ignore. And once you apply one, you get this storage into the widget basically. And then it shows you that there is a parameter being ignored. Let's take a look, for example, in the integer tool. And the parameter that I'm ignoring is this specific numeric field type. And what that means is that it will not change it depending on our parameter presets, and it will keep its original or whatever we set it to. And in this case, I would bring the integer, I would type the numeric field type, and you see that it appears as a storage. And now I can set it to integer because that's what actually is. And now to change again our master preset, if I change the float to have 3 digits, you will see that my integer is ignoring it. To further show this issue, for example, is the field text area. Right now, all my widgets are set to a height of 26. So if I would put them to a height of 40, all of them would follow that height, right? But the text area is important that has a certain specific height. So I'm going to delete its storage, and basically it's going to take it away. And when I apply it, you see that it becomes a very small area. So maybe what I need is to have this area to have a specific height regardless of my parameter preset. And that's why we have this ignore parameters aspect of it. And basically what I would do then is to say, okay, what parameter I'm targeting, in this case is the height. And to target them, we need to have the parameter name, not the label. In this case, the label is height, but the parameter name is age. So I'm going to type here age. And now you see here that it's being listened, if you want to call it like that. And I can set my height to, let's say, 120. And what that does is that every time I'm going to load this widget now, it's going to keep this specific height at this number. And it's quite important for the way these widgets are distributed and controlled. Because now I could change back to have a much smaller height for the overall, but because my field text area is being ignoring this specific parameter, it's not going to change it. And this is really all the tools you're going to need to actually make your own theme. And right now I'm working on having presets so that you would have specific and different amounts of these collections, and that would allow you to save it maybe as a JSON, unload it, and be even a bit more easy, but still working on it. And I'm quite excited to see what people will think about it and if it's going to be useful for a few. Thanks for everything, and see ya.